AI without understanding what you're doing doesn't create velocity, it creates speed, possibly in the wrong direction. And what you're really after is velocity, and you need to understand the speed and the direction.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest, Darryl Hobson. Now, you may know Darrell from LinkedIn. He's kind of all over the place. He's also an author and a retired fighter pilot. Is that right?
Close enough.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, Darrell?
Sure, that's a great intro, I guess. My name is Darryl Hobson, and a project manager has been my title for probably the longest. But that's taken me across many different industries, from aviation, telecommunications, into tech integration and consulting. But project manager has been certainly the core of my function in most of those roles, including aviation.
Yeah, I guess I kind of I buried the lead there a little bit with that you are a project manager by trade.
Right. Not just some guy that you bumped into on LinkedIn, right? But
Yeah.
but no, I do on LinkedIn. I bring a lot of my aviation history into the stories. It's interesting. Lots of people enjoy hearing those stories. Lots of people relate to those stories, and it separates me a little bit, I think, from just the general noise that you'll hear on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and it also you also have some hot takes on Agile, which helps separate you.
Yeah, and they're not deliberately antagonistic, and they're not deliberately hot takes just to raise the hair on people's necks. I actually get quite annoyed by people that are deliberately hostile, deliberately trying to annoy people just to get likes. But I don't think I do it on purpose. But I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I think that Agile has this weird thing of there's the evangelist crowd, there's the purist crowd, and then there's kind of everybody else. And I'm simplifying the crowds, but when you make a post about Agile, you get all of those and then some.
Yeah. And I just did one, and I was thinking it would be a little more controversial than it was, which kind of goes against what I just said. But I was able to keep most of them quiet because I've been trying to write posts that have a Teflon shield to them, because I know we get and I'm sure you do too, you get the trolls that'll jump in there that are just trying to be evangelical for the sake of being evangelical, or they're being purist for the sake of being purist, and they lose sight of why it is that we're trying to follow these frameworks or trying to explore these frameworks. And really, these posts are just about exploring the frameworks and exploring what works, what doesn't work. But I'm hope anyway that the central theme to my post is the why. It's if I deviate from being evangelical or being a purist, it's for the sake of the why.
Yeah, I remember just recently, actually, I made a post about that a Scrum Master is not an Agile project manager. And I highlighted the difference between a Scrum Master and a project manager because they are different roles.
Sure.
And there was a lot of, we'll say, mixed reactions in every which way you could imagine, and then some you couldn't.
Sure. Well, from a purist perspective, the Scrum Master, if you go way back, we're talking a decade ago, the Scrum Master wasn't even supposed to be involved in the team. They were there as a team advocate, as an advocate for what the team was trying to do, and didn't even need to be technically savvy about the project itself. They were there to run the team. And we've kind of lost our way there a little bit. But then I get wrapped up is a good word, in people who try and define what a project manager is, or what a Scrum Master is, or to the point what it should be, or what they think it should be. And then they have this purist view, which seems to be unilateral, which I have a problem with for the most part. And Scrum Master certainly falls into that category.
Yeah, you just highlighted something there that I don't even think you realized. The phrase you used, that's one of the most important phrases of anything I think you just said. What they think it should be.
What they think it should be, right. Yeah.
Because
there's one today that of course this is in the past now, because you're gonna publish this probably a couple of months from now, but so you can't really track down what today is. But it's a friend of mine, and he came out and said, and I comment on his posts a lot daily if I can. Brilliant project manager, but very opinionated about the way things should be and the way things are. And I think sometimes gets wrapped up in those definitions. And in some cases, I think they're just flat out wrong. And it gets in the way of the why, which is why I feel motivated to say things. And I'm not shy about telling you how I think it is. I don't remember being openly critical of anything that you've written, but certainly would be happy to do so, not in a rude way, but in a conversational way that hopefully contributes to that conversation. It gets people talking, which is ultimately why we're on LinkedIn, to try and further those conversations, to try and explore ideas and make some room in that space.
Yeah, I think that, the people that write stuff that's deliberately inflammatory, you can see it from a mile away if you've been creating content on LinkedIn for more than 5 minutes.
Sure.
And the people who write stuff, it's hard to talk about topics that have very nuanced details in 3,000 characters or less, and share a thought and be like, oh yeah, I've covered everything that I can cover on this very, very broad, specific topic, generally, of course. And the person who lives somewhere in the middle of nowhere tells you, well, I do this because my company is different.
Right. Yeah, that's the classic that you run into. That doesn't work for us because we're so unique that your methodologies don't work for us.
Yeah. And I always like to say they're called best practices for a reason, but they're not called all the times for a reason.
Right. But there's a core, right? PMP is another good one. I wrote a post recently that raised a few eyebrows about PMP, and it's normally the eyebrows get raised by the people who don't have PMP. But you don't have to have a PMP, and certainly PMBOK is not the be all end all. PMI doesn't have all of the answers. But to be an out of the box thinker, you need to know where that box is. So yeah, these don't apply to every situation, but there is a core that does apply in some form to most, if not all, scenarios.
Yeah, and that PMP question, it's a best practice to get it as a check the block, but it's not a requirement, because I know plenty of great project managers who never once even lifted the PMBOK.
Sure.
And it's only a modern requirement for roles more than anything.
Yeah, it depends what you mean by modern, of course, but PMI goes back a very long way. So does the PMP, but no, certainly not a requirement. I know many brilliant PMs that don't have a PMP. I didn't have a PMP for the longest time until recently, within the last decade, where it became mandatory to have it if you wanted to compete in space. And it still wasn't mandatory, but I think it's getting there now. That was what I posted about just a couple of weeks ago now, where it's gotten to the point where if you don't have a PMP, you're completely invisible. So many brilliant PMs with a lot of experience in the trenches doing the real work of project managers are being excluded because they don't have a PMP. And then it's causing people to perhaps invent certificates and invent experience that they don't have on paper just to try and compete in this market, which is tough today.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic right there. I've been very opinionated in that I am proud of my certifications. I have them hanging on my wall. I'm very proud of all the work that I've put in. And I don't know that I'm a fan of a lot of the stuff that's going on with the PMP. But at the same time, if I say being a badge protector and a gatekeeper and all that stuff, it means we're not going to further the community by not allowing new people in. So it's kind of a catch-22 in there.
It is, and I hadn't realized that PMI had changed the standards of the PMP recently, but I had a lot of comments. A lot of people came to me privately and publicly that said that, yeah, it's much easier to get the PMP today than it was 5 years ago. Pre-2022 was the resounding comment that I got. I had no idea that was the case. If that is the case, then how do you come back from that? You've got 3 years worth of PMPs that didn't earn it the way that everybody else did, which I don't know that for a fact. So I'm not saying that's the way it is, but if it is, then that's going to be a problem. But I understand that PMI is trying to backpedal that one and trying to not reinvent, but certainly reinvigorate the path to a PMP.
Yeah, as to, we'll say, mid-career to senior career individuals, it was always harder back in my day, right?
I guess so, yeah.
And
that's what I'm saying. I don't know. All I can repeat is what people have told me, and I've pushed on that because with this particular post I'm talking about, I was that Teflon sheen that I put on the post was I didn't want PMI to suddenly come after me and start rejecting my PDUs next time I renew because they thought I was going after them. I wasn't going after PMI. I'm not going after PMI. I'm actually going after the lazy AI decision making that goes into project management careers today, where they're using the PMP as a gateway, as you've got to check the box. Otherwise, we're not even going to pull your resume out of the pile to have it reviewed by a real person, which is
and just the fact that we talk about these certifications, and I'm a firm believer that when you hear certain certifications that someone has, you create, if you're in the industry, you create a reputation of, okay, this person already knows some of the short form, so I can speak in tongues to them, so to speak.
right.
And a lot of the times you don't always get that knowledge base that you expect out of certification holders in any certification. And we try to police our own, but it's hard to, once you've got the certification, it's hard to take it away unless you choose to not renew it.
Sure. And there was a time when I thought that, I don't really need this anymore. Do I really want to go through the hassle of renewing it? It's not really a hassle at all. So fortunately, I did keep it. But yeah, I can't, having gone through that twice now, I can't imagine letting it go. Just I wouldn't want to have to recertify as a PMP for sure. Especially given that I've been outspoken about the certification process.
Yeah, because when you submit your application, PMI will pull it specifically because your name is on the list of audits.
I doubt it would ever be that important, but that certainly creeps into your mind. Yeah, every time I submit a PDU, I question whether someone's going to pull it because it has my name on it.
I think you give yourself a little too much credit.
And well, that's why I premised that. Yeah, so I don't think I will ever be that important. So
I think there are plenty more outspoken people than you and me, and we both know some of them probably.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice thing about self-policing that I try to keep my standards for myself, very high. So, and then rather than comparing myself against everybody else, but there are so many people out there who don't feel the same way. So yeah, I'm probably low on the list. Same is true when it comes to taxes, I think.
But that comes to the whole point of, it goes back to what we started with, which was like the clickbait and the rage posting and all that kind of stuff. It's when you're doing things from a place of authenticity, maliciousness is built off of your credibility. So if you've built your credibility as being somebody who's genuinely questioning things, then that's different than somebody who posts something just to get hot takes and engagement that you're ignoring because you're not going to respond to the people saying negative things about you.
Yep, sure. And that whole space is, I'm still learning that space. I'm relatively new to LinkedIn. Been on LinkedIn forever, but haven't really contributed to the platform consistently for very long, probably about a year or so.
Me too. It's almost a year now that I've been really getting active on there. But let's talk about some of the stuff that you actually are active about and passionate about. I know you have thoughts on the Agile Manifesto.
Right. Yeah. One of the posts, actually, it was my very first LinkedIn post. It was a couple of years ago. I wrote as a thought as I was teaching the Agile Manifesto or teaching Agile to one of my clients, which was to people were misinterpreting the Agile Manifesto, where the gap in the middle, the word over, is used in the manifesto over and over again. And many people that I was talking to, in fact, pretty much everyone, was reading that as though it meant instead of. So I'm thinking, how do I, rather than be preachy about this, how do I reinforce that the architects of the Agile Manifesto weren't saying we should do this instead of that. They were saying we should prioritize this over that, and they've used the word over. And if you read it, we don't have to go into it. You can read it yourself, if you're listening to this. But so it occurred to me to read it backwards, read it right to left. And how do we do the things on the right how do we achieve the things on the right by using the processes on the left that the manifesto was trying to promote. So relationships with clients over contracts. So how do we create contracts that allow us to collaborate with clients? So reading it right to left. And you can read every one of them right to left and get a different interpretation, which I think speaks more to what the intent might have been from the original writers. And I've spoken to a couple of them directly, and they hadn't thought of it in that way, and it's not 100% what they meant. But every one of them that I spoke to was right behind it.
Yeah, and I think that we talk a lot about stuff that's been written in the past, and even just something written like the PMBOK that's being rewritten. Just because it was written one way at a time doesn't mean that current iteration and current interpretation isn't valid, because we look back on historical documents all the time and we try and translate them through the modern lens, and then we try and translate them through the lens of the time it was written. But if you weren't alive when it was written, or you weren't physically in the room, you have no idea.
Sure. Well, that's the difference between, or there is a difference between, and I wrote about this in my book, between being an originalist and being a literalist. And if you'll get in trouble if you try and be a literalist, and you'll also get in trouble if you try and be an originalist too. Understanding the difference between the two and having a conversation about that is, I think, it is worthy. And that's, I think, what you're getting at with the comment.
Yeah, and let's talk about your book. You are
Yeah,
a best-selling author, right?
I am, yeah. That, and I didn't write the book to be a best-selling author, but again, that's kind of the point too. Is that goes to the authenticity of where it came from. And when I started writing the book, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to be a best-selling author? Somebody sat me down and said, if you think like that, you never will be, and even if you are, it won't matter. So just write the book for you. Don't write it for anybody else. So I did, and although it doesn't appear to be a business book, really, if you look at the title, it looks like it's a book about religion and science. The name of the book is One Truth, which is, speaks for itself. The subtitle being Refining Faith with the Evolution of Science, the word evolution there being quite critical, because how do you refine your faith, so the originalism of your thinking and your teachings, with the evolution of facts today? But the book is not really about religion and science. It's about critical thinking. Really is a business book. There's a lot of business in there, and there's a lot of lessons that I learned about things that are easily knowable and easily provable to ourselves, yet we choose to believe something opposite. But it's easy to test, and it's easily knowable. So then how do you rationalize that? And the book goes into those discussions that I've had with myself about those sorts of things, and then raises the question about how do you ask those questions of yourself, and how do you use that knowledge to move yourself and others forward in a logical way, using critical thinking, not necessarily emotions, without ignoring the emotions either.
And I'll have a link to that in the show notes for anyone who's interested.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to help each other grow and not just be one-sided. Because if I wanted to just talk all day on a microphone, I can do that and no one will listen.
Sure.
I have to bring engaging people like you on to get people to listen.
Well, thank you. Yeah, but it takes a catalyst, though, and you're the catalyst for that. Don't sell yourself short either.
So you've also talked a lot about old school skills and some of the differences between, I guess, that and modern day. And you want to talk about that and expand on that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, and I can. It's a slippery slope, because you're going to be one of those guys that back in my day, it was always, we used to walk to school in 6 feet of snow uphill both ways. And some of that's true, but most of that is irrelevant. But where it's relevant today, especially with AI and especially with some of these complex tools, is that people are trying to do things with artificial intelligence that they don't know how to do without it, which I think is dangerous. From a business perspective, and we can open that box and unpack that a little bit too. But this is where I bring some of my aviation knowledge too. In that when I was a flight instructor back when GPS became a thing. Nobody's going to know what a Loran is, but a Loran was the first sort of GPS navigation device that was ground-based. Antennas all over the world. You triangulate on these antennas. And it was pretty cool. In fact, Loran was much more accurate than GPS was. But then when GPS came along, it was a lot more repeatable. In other words, you could know exactly where you were with Loran, but you could get back to that exact same space with GPS. The problem is when either one of them stopped working, you needed to know how to figure out where you were without it, because it could just suddenly stop working. Back in the days of early GPS, they would scramble one of the signals from one of the satellites, unless you're in the military, so that it wasn't really that accurate, so that you couldn't lob something through a window, through somebody's window from 1,000 miles away. They've since unscrambled that, so you really can do that if you know what you're doing. But back in the day, if it stops working, how do you navigate without it? And I was criticized then too, where I remember quite clearly one of the students that I was, some recurrent training we're doing, He came with his own airplane. He paid me to do recurrent training his own airplane. And the first thing I did was start popping circuit breakers, one of which was his brand new GPS. So he had to fly without his GPS, and he couldn't do it.
Well, you're bringing me into my limited knowledge of aviation, and it's making me think of airspace
Mhm.
because I did the FAA Part 107 for a commercial drone pilot.
Oh,
And
okay.
in
Yeah.
order to do that, you have to learn airspace. And I was talking with one of my wife's uncles who was a helicopter pilot for the local police force. And I said to him, and we were talking about it, and he said, you having any trouble with anything? I was like, I can't figure out airspace. And he looked at me and said, the only way to fully understand airspace is to be able to teach it.
Sure.
And, when you talk about new school and old school, like what you were talking about, the idea was I'm imagining you used to be able to have to pull out the paper map, look at it, and know all the different landmarks and markings and everything on the map. Whereas now you can pull up a map digitally and it'll tell you everything you need to know
Sure.
with just call outs rather than actually having to know how to read it.
Well, you still have to know how to read it, because if your electronics suddenly disappear, which they can, you still have to have a paper backup copy. If you get into a situation where you violated the FARs, which is the Federal Aviation Regulations, then if you're in a real airplane, you say, "Oh well, my iPad died." That's not an excuse. And if you're a drone pilot and you violate some airspace because your iPad died, that's not an excuse either. So you do still really need to understand or be able to understand and have the copies. It's just very rare that anyone gets called on the carpet for that.
Well, and that's the point is, just like with anything in life, you can automate things until you can't. And then when you can't automate it is when you get yourself into trouble because you don't know how to do it manually.
Sure. And we're seeing that all the time with AI. People are trying to do things that they don't understand how to do manually. So there's two problems there. One is if the AI stops or it breaks or it's not working, you may not know how to fix it. But on the other hand, if you don't know how to do it manually to start with, how can you automate that and know that you're doing it effectively, efficiently, and with the suitable amount of rigor? And I would argue that you can't. So we're creating these sloppy practices. The whole no code, low code craze, it's not craze, but the whole no code, low code movement that we're seeing is a great example of that. Following that was the vibe coding, which we're seeing people creating apps and software websites that look very clever, but they have no idea how they work. They have no idea how the vibe code actually works. So they've got no idea whether they've opened up a portal into some security violation or some other violation that they're just not aware of because they don't know how to do it manually.
Yeah. My favorite posts to comment on are the ones where I see stuff talking about how AI will automate stuff for you. And I always say, well, if you've got a sloppy process to start with, AI will automate a sloppy process to make it an optimized sloppy process rather than actually looking at what you're doing before you throw it into AI to figure out how to make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the buzz phrases, the jargon that you were referring to earlier, velocity. Well, velocity, if you understand velocity, is a combination of speed and direction. So AI, without understanding what you're doing, doesn't create velocity, it creates speed, possibly in the wrong direction. And what you're really after is velocity, and you need to understand the speed and the direction.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason we use velocity and sprints, but I don't think everyone fully understands what we mean by sprint velocity. It's kind of like we're using agile, we're going fast and breaking things. Not quite.
Yeah, but velocity is not just going fast. It's going fast in a prescribed direction. Doesn't mean the prescribed direction is right, but we know it's a combination of speed and direction.
Yeah, and I think this is a great place to pause to talk about the Patreon because as everybody who's listens to this knows, I have a Patreon where I conduct the post-mortem interviews, which is for $5 a month. You get access to bonus interviews with every one of my guests, including Darrell. And on the post-mortem interview with Darrell, we're going to be talking about, shocker of shockers, AI and prompt engineering. And Darrell's going to be imparting some wisdom about which tool to use for which things and some tips and tricks on prompts, which are very valuable in the world if you don't know what you're doing. So with that, let's get back to some stories about you now, because you told me you've been hacked. You've had your bank hacked, not once, but twice.
No, actually, the other way around. Might be even better story. I actually hacked a bank, not once,
Oh,
but
you
twice.
hacked the bank.
I was the hacker. Yeah,
Care to share what you can
and
legal?
did it legally. I did it legally, of course, not illegally, but I did it legally. Not once. I did it so they were so happy with me. They forced me to do it a second time. The second time I think was a little sketchy, but hey, it was still legal. This is back in the era. So we're deep into financial crisis. Those of you remember the banking crisis, the mortgage crisis. There were a couple of banks that weren't deep into mortgages, so they survived. And then the banks that were too big to fail obviously were bailed out. But there were a lot of banks that weren't too big to fail, and they got swept up in the whole mortgage crisis. And a lot of them ended up with deposits that were less than their their holdings. So the FDIC came in and took those banks over. At the time, one of my clients, one of my biggest clients, was a bank who wasn't in the mortgage business. So the FDIC partnered with those banks, this one in particular, paid those banks to come in and take over those failing banks. So the way that worked is on a Monday morning, the FDIC would go kick the doors in on these banks, quite literally, before opening time. Surprise everybody by kicking the doors in and take over these banks, and then hand control over to these foster parents, for want of a better word. And I was a tech consultant for one of those banks. And what we would do prior to having the doors kicked in, we would hack the bank. We would get inside the bank and we would take virtual copies of all the servers, all of their network infrastructure. So we had an exact copy of what the bank looked like before it was taken over. And then we could compare it to what happened afterwards. Because a lot of times what would happen is the banks would realize that they were about to be taken over, and they would start erasing records. They would start covering their tracks. They would start doing all kinds of things that, as we know from watching TV, that you don't go to jail for the things that you did. You go to jail for lying about the things that you did or didn't do. So that's exactly what we're doing. But it was interesting that it was relatively easy to get into a bank from the outside and take copies of everything, virtualize it, have a little mini VMware version of a bank that was not fully operational, but it was certainly a copy of the bank without them knowing about it. It was a lot of fun. As a kid, I remember watching the movie Sneakers and thinking it was I forget who's in that now, but was it Robert Redford? I think Robert Redford was in that. But great movie where they were paid to rob banks essentially, and then they would come and give a report about how they robbed the bank, how they broke the security. So that was good. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had that conversation with my son this past weekend about the cover up is always worse than the crime. So
was your son under duress during that conversation, or was that a friendly conversation? Because I've had that conversation with my kids, and they were under duress when we.
Well, it started off as him not wanting to own up to something, and then the way
There you go.
my process is always I never really deal with the situation at the moment. The next day, I sit my kids down and I'll have a conversation with them the next day when all the emotions are out of it, and we can talk about this, kind of doing the lessons learned retrospective style than in the moment when no one's going to pay attention to anything.
Sure. Yeah, I like that.
Doesn't always work, but I try.
Sure. Yeah, I normally go into that with some techniques that I've learned along the way. Whereas, like I already know what happened. I just want to know why.
Exactly.
And then they're like, okay. And so you get past the part where they think they can withhold it, and they go into try and spinning the why. Well, they've already just admitted that the how and the when. So we've got past that point. So
Yeah, the best parenting technique is you just corner your kid and say, I know what you did. Why don't you just tell me and we'll make it easier?
sure.
And then sometimes that can backfire on you because he'll tell you things you didn't know about.
And didn't want to know about too. I just had this. I've got now 3 adult children. My youngest daughter just turned 18, but my middle son was home for the weekend. I came home from college for the weekend, and I was actually wanting his advice about what I should do with some information that I had come across about one of his siblings, and I didn't know whether I should share it or just keep it completely secret. But I didn't want to tell him which one it was or what it was, so I was asking him in a fairly cryptic way, and I sort of backed into a place where he thought I might be reverse engineering a conversation about him, and so he was being very evasive. And he ended up confessing. Said, "I'm trying to think what it is that I did that you could possibly have found out." I thought you were pulling one of those psyops things on me where you were trying to get me to confess something. So I said, no, it's not about you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fairly direct with my kids when I want something from them, because that's something I've learned as a PM is subtlety is a lost art form on a lot of people, adults included.
Yeah,
So be direct, and then you may be considered the jerk for it, but at least people know where you stand.
sure. Yeah, I have a complicated relationship with that because part of that is cultural. Because I'm British, so sarcasm is a big part of our language model, and we have a fairly complex relationship with sarcasm. Sarcasm can be just a way of joking around, but it can also be a way of saying exactly what you mean, and with the cover of joking around. And occasionally, I'll say things that are so direct and so to me obviously in jest or obviously sarcastic that some people, particularly Americans, for some reason, think that I'm serious, and they're horribly offended that I was that direct. When I just can't imagine anybody ever being that direct. It's a complicated relationship.
Well, you're prior military, you would understand that, you know, it's a very unique dynamic when you talk about the military, and I don't care what country it is. We're just a different group.
No, we're exactly the same as everybody else, cut from the same cloth.
Well, when I say that, I mean what we're willing to say to each other.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're willing to say it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had
Like,
this conversation with somebody on LinkedIn who I won't say who it is, but not that it matters. But she had the privilege of spending a weekend training with some former British military special forces, and she came back thinking that or saying that she was impressed with the camaraderie and how close knit they were and how brotherly they were in the best possible way. And I'm thinking that they have you duped, because although if you start shooting at us, we're going to join shoulders, but behind the scenes, the things that we're willing to say to each other, and the way we treat each other is completely different, and it is anything but brotherly. Or if it is, it's completely the other side of that. The things that we put ourselves through or put each other through can be pretty intense.
well, I think you just highlighted something really important there, that, just because, this goes to project management too, that we don't all have to get along to all be pulling in the same direction and make the project work. And I think that's something that a lot of people fail to realize is we don't all have to be friends. At the end of the day, we just have to get the job done.
Sure. We have to be friends enough to be able to work with each other, but you don't have to be you don't have to be on each other's Christmas card list to do that, but you have to be able to trust who you're working with and know that we're all pulling in that direction. And I have a complicated relationship with that too, because I'm very outspoken. If you give me your opinion and tell me how you think we should do something and I vehemently disagree, I'm going to vehemently disagree, and I'm going to bring receipts. So it won't be my opinion. It will be my opinion, but it'll be backed up. I'll tell you why I think it's my opinion and where that opinion came from. And you can take it or leave it. But at the end of the day, if we all decide that this is how we're going to do it, even if I disagree, that is how we're going to do it. And you won't find anyone who's going to pull harder to get that done in that way than me. But people tend to remember that I was against that plan in the first place, and they're looking at me looking to me to say, "I told you so," and those words never come out.
Yeah, it comes down to, I'm reminded of my wife and I were watching a TV show, and there was a manager, and he was like, I agree with everything, and I send emails of great idea, or always positive affirmations of any ideas that come across his inbox, until there was a catastrophic failure of an idea. It was the premise of the show. And then he had to go and delete the emails, delete the hard, and he's like, I even keep a folder of all the hard copies. So when things go right, I've got the backup to say I was a part of the decision.
Yeah.
But then when things go wrong, he's like, now I've got to go burn it and erase it and do all this stuff. And it wound up being his downfall because he agreed with everything. And it's like, it doesn't, it's great on TV, but there are people like that. And the problem is that they don't read what they're agreeing with.
Sure. Yeah. Well, agreement is the path of least resistance. And I wrote about this quite recently, where that's the default path is agreement. And nobody, doesn't mean that people agree, just that they're not going to disagree. And for some reason, culturally, we don't like disagreement. Everyone wants to agree with each other and come to alignment and agreement. And I don't think that's necessarily the quickest way to come to the right solution.
Yeah. I had a former boss, and actually he's a former guest, Ed Bacco, who told me, if I ever hear the words, I knew this was going to happen, come out of your mouth, and you did not voice that you thought this was going to happen when we were in the decision process, I'm firing you on the spot because you should have
Sure.
spoken up 2 months ago when we were planning this if you really believe this.
Yeah, well, that's worse than the "I told you so." At least if you say "I told you so," and that's it. There's never come out of my mouth. I might think it in the back of my head, but you never see it through my eyes, even. But at least if you say "I told you so," you did actually tell them so. But I knew this was going to happen. Meant that you sat there on your hands and said nothing. So no, that's a problem.
Yeah. And I understand also that you've flown through the Bermuda Triangle
Many times.
and you're still here to tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the Bermuda Triangle has this reputation for very good reason. That particular part of the Caribbean is a very violent place from a weather perspective, and the weather changes very very quickly. So it's not that there's some mystical place, but the weather changes very quickly. The Gulf Stream goes right through the middle of that, so there's a lot of energy in the water. Yeah, yeah, big problems.
So is it as treacherous as the TV shows make it sound?
No, no mystical places, no big whirlpools, no green fog, nothing like that. But it is definitely a violent place. The weather can go from serene to devastating within a matter of minutes. One of my favorite stories to tell, just from the weather perspective, was that there are two types of pilot. There's an instrument rated pilot and a visual flight rules rated pilot. So when you first get your pilot's license, you're a visual only. It means you can't fly through clouds. So all these pictures you see of people flying through clouds, it looks fun, but that's actually very illegal. You can't do that for fun. You have to be strictly controlled to be in those environments. And so visually, you have to. There's a visual separation, visual flight rules, visual separation from clouds, etc. And then instrument flight rules, where you can't just fly on instruments. You have to file flight plan. Somebody has to know you're there, and so it's very controlled. But in the Bahamas or in the Bermuda Triangle, you can fly in crystal clear weather, no problem, with 100 miles visibility, and then 15, 20 minutes later, you can be in the suit and you can see the clouds forming beneath you, and you can see the clouds growing vertically faster than you can outclimb them. And that's where people get in trouble. You get a visual flight rules pilot who's not familiar with flying under instruments, gets swallowed up by a cloud, and is violent. Inside one of those cumulus clouds or cumulonimbus clouds can get very violent very quickly and get very dark too. So you can go from brilliant sunshine at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to being almost pitch darkness at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because you got swallowed by a thunder.
So is that where the time warp comes in, where everyone talks about you lose time and days and everything else there?
Yeah, and that's a cognitive thing. I mean, that's very real. In that I don't think you lose time, but you lose track of time. So you can end up as you're traveling at least 100 miles an hour in a small airplane, a couple of 100 miles an hour in a bigger airplane. So yeah, you can find yourself in places that you didn't expect to be because you're hyper focused on keeping the flat side up, that you don't realize that time is elapsing. So yeah, you can definitely find yourself in places that you didn't expect to be. And that's where the planning comes in. And that's one of the allegories that translates into business, and that you can get hyper focused on negative scenarios, on pressure, and time flies much more quickly than you think it might be. And other things are happening. So you need to maintain that situational awareness to realize that things are going on around you.
Yeah. In crisis situations, seconds feel like minutes. And I've heard this and I've lived it personally too, that you talk to people about gunfights and all that stuff, and they're like, yeah, I was in a gunfight for an hour. And you're like, that was 30 seconds.
Yeah. Or not even. Yeah.
And, and it's one of those things where the mind plays tricks on you sometimes of how long something really takes when you're under high duress and you're focused and you're multitasking.
There are a couple of scenarios there where, again, another fun story of the most scared I have ever been that I was going to die was in a simulator. And it's a mindset that I would put myself in when I got into a simulator, that I didn't think, oh, I'm in a simulator. It's just a simulator. It's not. We're going to put ourselves into this mindset of this is real, and you're going to take this. You're going to treat this like it's real, and you're going to behave just like it's real. And we got into a situation which you can in a simulator, which you can't really in real life, where I was convinced there was no getting out of this situation. And I experienced for the very first time this time dilation where time just slowed down. And suddenly I could have these conversations with myself, and I could go through all of the decision trees that I had been through in my head as part of training prior to that. And I could see it all mapped out. I knew exactly what I could do at various places. And I got myself out of the situation, which had everyone scratching their head. It's like, how did you do that? We were quite convinced we had killed you and you managed to get out. How did you do that? And then we mapped it out. And it took us a good hour probably to figure out what I went through, the thought processes and the information that I brought into that scenario to get out of that situation. And it was maybe 3 seconds from we're in this situation to now we're heading out. It took more than 3 seconds to get out of it, but it took less than 3 seconds to figure out how to get out of it. And it was a process that took us an hour to unpack after the event.
And that's a testament to what they always say is there's no such thing as being over prepared, but there is such a thing as bad preparation.
Sure. I think you can spend too long preparing. And again, I wrote a post about this too fairly recently, that those that over prepare may be deferring making a decision. And if
Yes.
you're preparing to defer something or to mask your way out of something is obviously bad. So that's over preparation. But no, if you're preparing, if you have the time to prepare, then prepare. You cannot be over prepared. People make fun of me all the time, not just my family, but like preparing and having these decision trees. Like, here's what I'm going to do in these situations, and if I ever get into this situation, this is what I'm going to do. This is what they'll probably do. This is probably what's going to happen, and this is how we'll react then. If something else happens, this is what we'll do. And it sounds neurotic, and it probably is. But there are several times when I found more than several, I found myself in those scenarios and I just don't have to think. So there's people are rushing around like chickens with their head cut off, trying to figure out what to do. And I'm quite coolly just pressing buttons going, well, this is how we're going to get out of this because this is what we figured out when we drew it up on the board. And some of those are business related. Other of those are not so business related and a little more intense. But that's the preparation part, because what people miss is that you can't make this up in the moment. And this is where back to the AI tool is that you can't say, oh, well, I'm just going to look it up when I get there. You just don't have time to look it up when you get there. If we keep this just business related, 2:00 in the morning, and someone wakes you up and says that SolarWinds has told you that your app has crashed and you've got 100,000 customers that can't get into fill in the blank. That's not the time to go to ChatGPT and find out how you vibe coded some application. But that's where we're at. We're at a place where we have got hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars riding on these vibe codes within SaaS applications that nobody knows how to troubleshoot when they break at the worst possible moment.
Well, and then that's where, we talk about when one economy gets sunset, another one builds. And I saw somebody post recently, they saw their first role posted for it wasn't Vibe, it was code review expert to review Vibe coding. And I predicted like 2 days before, I was like, that's going to be a role is
Sure.
we're going to be, instead of having to know how to code, you're going to need the people that know how to code to review the AI generated code. Because if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know what you're looking at.
Yeah, well, this code is finding its way into compliant organizations and compliant situations where it works, but is it compliant? So now you have to make sure that you haven't violated some compliance rule with your vibe code. Working is becoming the new bar, and there are many more bars that you need to pass. You'll see it again on LinkedIn too. I don't harp on LinkedIn all the time, but the thing is the what do I do part line on within LinkedIn, and some of those you can see it today is I fix your vibe code.
That's a new one. I have not seen that one.
Yeah, seen it a couple of times now.
So now before we wrap up, I've got a personalized question that I came up with for you.
Sure.
Now, we talked a lot about the Agile Manifesto, and if Darryl Hobson was asked by the Agile committee, you can change one thing in it, either update it, take it away, change, what would it be?
I think documentation. I think that needs to be, I should have probably paused and thought about that, but I didn't know that question was coming. But the documentation one gets me, where I think the Agile Manifesto gave license to not document what we're doing. And I see that too much. And I don't think we need complete documentation before we move forward, but I think we need complete documentation. And if you read that one right to left, that's exactly what I mean there. We need documentation in order to get to working software, not working software instead of fully documented waterfall type methods.
Yeah, I've told this story numerous times, but my first role in project management was on governance. And I used to have to audit senior PM's projects as a junior PM.
Uh-huh.
And I would sit there with these senior PMs who have been doing this for 10, 15 years, massive projects. And I'm sitting there with my checklist of documentation. And I'd tell them right at the beginning, explain to me why you don't need this document. And if you can sell me on it, I'll bless you off on not having it because I can sell someone else on it. So, I mean, with that, I want to hand the floor over to you. Let everybody know where they can find you, what you're up to, what you want to share with the audience, and go on.
Sure. Well, obviously, LinkedIn is the place to go. I'm Darryl M. Hobson on LinkedIn. I post pretty much daily, even weekends. I normally don't post on Saturday. I normally post something personal though on a Sunday, some reflection that I get. So there's a lot of content to dig through on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of content to come too. As far as what else I wanted to share, wasn't expecting that question, so I guess I could have been more prepared for that. But I'm a rigorous guy, and that one of my catchphrases that I use all the time, which is not very popular, is the mentality or the psychology of slowing it down to get it done faster. And that gets me in trouble because most people just hear the slow it down part, and they don't stick around long enough to hear the to get it done faster part. And I've shown this many times in many, if not all, scenarios where you can slow things down and you can get them done faster. That old, I forget where it originally came from, but the cliche of, you give me 12 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend 8 to 10 hours sharpening my axe, and I'm going to do it in the shade of that tree. Sharpen that axe, and then I'm going to take 2 hours to cut the tree down while you're still trying to bludgeon it down in the sun with with an axe. That's a hill that I'll die on for sure. And that translates then into project management and the rigors of project management. It goes back to the documentation you're talking about, that I'm also not a big fan of forensic project management. I'm a big fan of project management to be predictive, so that you can use all of the assets and the artifacts that we're putting together, not just to say that we documented the project because I like documentation. I hate it, but I do like to be able to use it to predict what's going to happen. Project plans, for meticulous project plans that are built through iterations, and they're built to predict outcomes rather than to forensically document what happened. I think we as project managers, get a bad rap for just being those forensic guys who go document what happened and then hold everyone accountable for something that they couldn't see coming. Well, you could have seen it coming if you'd done all of this before you needed it rather than after the fact. And because forensic project management is a waste of time and money. It's there just to dot the I's and cross the T's just because somebody said we should. Well, they said you should because you can use it to be predictive. And I've got many allegories that go into that too, about the ability to use project plans to be predictive, which sound counterintuitive, but I say have receipts. That's the thing I do. I bring receipts.
Yeah, you reminded me of what I was taught in infantry school when we were taught how to clear a room. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
That translates into other industries too. One of my passions is following motorsports. And that's very true there with motorsports. The quickest way around the track is smooth, and slow is smooth, and smooth is fast for sure. Slow it down to get it done faster the first time, once, because we take too many shortcuts in project management, or people are too willing to take shortcuts to get something done just to show momentum. That momentum could well require undoing what you did in order to do the next thing, rather than doing something a little slower and then doing it once, doing it right first time and building rather than rebuilding every time we iterate.
Yeah, I wrote recently on my PM Mondays about technical debt, and that's exactly what you just described, as we all know. So I think that's a great place to wrap for today. I want to thank Darrell for his time and for joining me. I want to thank all the Patreon subscribers who help fund the show and keep everything going. I want to thank, most importantly, the listeners who tune in every week to hear the amazing guests that I bring on and all the great conversations that we have. So don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe, do all that fun stuff on all the platforms. And links to Darrell's stuff will be in the show notes. And I'll end like I always do. May all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Darryl Hobson, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.